Okay, this is our final work session of the day on Camp Bonneville. So Amber, I'm
Yes.
turning it over
I'm
to
going to
you.
be driving and talking you through some of our bullet points. Like, Kevin, do you want to join me up here and we can talk through some of these areas that we wanted to speak with council today?
Kevin, thank you for being here.
Okay. So the first thing I want to bring attention to, and I think we've talked about this in a couple conversations, is I want to mention on the front of this is Ken and I inherited in Public Works. Ken's the director, started in January 1st of 2023. And the Public Works came in under my umbrella in end of 22. So I just want to talk, and Kevin has transitioned over to the lands manager this year. So I just wanted to, and we talked a little bit about this in Ken's update to council of how we made that decision to break apart parks and lands and have some of our special projects that are currently over in the land side instead of being, I would say, like Ken mentioned it in our work session when we talked about Public Works, having, whether it's PVJR or Camp Bonneville with parks operations was not ideal in being able to look at all the things that needed to be looked at with this project. So I just wanted to kind of use that as a jumping off point. So here you'll see on our website the 2025 Camp Bonneville priorities, and I'll go through these a little bit at a time here. So our update on our use agreements with FBI, the Sheriff's Office, and I want to call out the Sheriff's Office is an interagency agreement. So that's not an outside contract that typically comes back in front of council. However, we will bring that back for transparency purposes to illustrate that we have the same language in both documents. So we expect that to be done in Q2 2025. I think, and Kevin, if you want to speak to anything further on the FBI, Kevin and Ken had a good conversation last Friday with the FBI about where we're going to land, and that to come back to council on the costing, the remediation costs, as well as the usage and the yearly agreements. So we've decided to go to yearlies instead of a 5-year or 10-year plan. And so that will be coming back and forth in front of council yearly instead of at those increments so that we can discuss it at those times. And Kevin, if I miss anything, please
No, I think
talk
you,
over the top of
I
me.
think you got it.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
And so
Chair.
which entities will the yearly apply to?
Everybody.
And everybody includes FBI, sheriff?
Yes. The only thing as I indicated, the sheriff is an interdepartmental agency agreement. Right. It's not an outside entity, but we will bring that back in front of council. Even though it's usually department to department, we will bring it back in front of council for that reason.
Are there other entities?
So the entities that we have is the FBI, the Sheriff's Office, and you can see that listed on our website. ATF, as well as the Metro Explosives Disposal Unit. And as I mentioned last week, Kevin gave the halt to the MEEDU, excuse me. And we will be discussing what their agreement looks like, but it won't be including any sort of explosives. So that will be a distinction that we'll be making. And of course, council will see that, and you can have a choice whether to approve it or not after we've made those reductions in the usage piece. Kevin, is there anything
Amber,
you want to add on that?
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
so the Metro Explosives Disposal Unit is like a task force, you might call it. So it's multiple agencies that are
Yes.
involved in that. FBI, sheriff, City of Portland Police. And then in addition to that, there's also SWAT,
Yes.
regional SWAT, and that is also a group of different agencies. So we'll be working on getting use agreements for all of those established.
Exactly. And I think it's important to note, and we talked about this in past conversations, each agency will have their agreement and there's no umbrella part to that agency. So each agency will have to give their usage, their members that need access to the card panel, excuse me, long day. So if I mess up my words here, access to the card panel will have to be coming from that, whether it's the task force and their agreement and their usage, or sheriff's office and so on and so forth. So there's no umbrella usage agreements like we had in the past where it was one agency that could that brought in multiple people underneath that agreement. Any questions on those pieces before I move on to the next sections? And I know we'll probably come back around to those.
I have a question about being able to access.
Yes, I'm going to that right next. Yes. So as I mentioned in the last year or so, we've been working on the sheriff. Oh, sorry, Counselor Little.
I'm sorry.
I was just you're saying that you're working on usage agreements. When will they all come out at the same time, or?
I think they're going to be staggered.
Yeah.
So we started with the FBI first, and that's, we've made progress with getting that negotiated between the two agencies. We drafted one for the sheriff. We'll be providing that to the sheriff for review here shortly. We have a draft for ATF that's in sort of early rough draft stage, and then we'll build from there. So MEDU and SWAT will come after that.
And they will be reviewed each year
Yes.
at the same time for all of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the way we're setting it up would be so that they can be renewed annually. As long as the terms stay the same, then it would be an easy process to renew.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious on each one when they will be completed, and that we could give the public a timeline generally of when each one of those will be done, so it's not just open-ended. Is that possible?
We would love to have that too, because I
Okay.
know FBI has been taking many months since council gave the direction to
Right.
negotiate
I
that.
understand we
So
don't have control over
Yes.
everything.
We have urgency on that, and our hope is, as we indicated here, Q2 of this year is when we're hoping to wrap all those up.
And they'll all come back to the council annually
Yes.
to review.
Yes.
And when the drafts come forward, we'll review those too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. You ready for access control? Move on to that? Okay. So this is an area that Kevin's been working on for quite some time to change the access control security to the gate. And in the past, the sheriff's office they are the ones that put that piece in. And Kevin, if you want to talk anything on that, feel free, and then I can go to the email that we
Yeah.
shared.
So essentially the gate access, the sheriff's office has control of who is allowed to access. There's a list and it's programmed into the gate. FBI also has an access panel. So we'll be working on transitioning everything to a single access panel that facilities will control, and Public Works will have the list of people that are added to it. So sheriff's office people will be added to that list. Public Works employees will be added to that list. FBI staff that need access to the property will be added to that list. If you're not on the list, you don't have access to the property. We'll also be working on determining who needs 24-hour access, like myself and compliance manager for Camp Bonneville, Public Works director, emergency response, things of that nature, and who only needs access from, say, whatever the hours is that are specified in the agreement. Is that 9 to 6, something like that. So we have the ability to lock down that access in such a way.
And I would just add real quick to that, as the email that you received from me last Friday about the sheriff, and I know the sheriff's in the audience, and we had a really great discussion. He's been a really collaborative partner on this portion. So the access will be locked down to the users Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. If there's anything outside that activity time, it has to be approved by Public Works and Kevin or Ken, whether the designee in the office, to approve. Like if it was at 7 p.m., if we were going to have it that day, it would have to be a pre-approval because the access is locked down to that time.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just asking questions to make sure everything's out there and really clear. So 9 to 6 only, the individuals will be listed, or there will only be access given to individuals, and will they each get a physical card that
Yes.
that they can only use?
Correct.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just wanting to know, so we kind of control the access. What about leaving? Is that time stamped to make sure that they're abiding by the contract to not be there off hours?
So I'll need to look into that, but I don't believe so because the access panel records when you come in. And so when you leave, you just have to drive up to the gate to allow the gate to open and then you leave, right? So we'll have to come up with some other security measure if that's a concern or if that becomes a concern.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that's stipulated in each of the agreements will be the time frame, and the sheriff's office has already agreed to that. So the other piece I want to call out is I'm just going to read from our document here. So CCSO must restrict all law enforcement. This will also comply with everybody else. Law enforcement activities to the shooting range and the simulation building T1940 only. The former command post T1980 is only allowed for meeting purposes, not for law enforcement activities. Under no circumstances will any reassignment of access to other personnel or other agencies be allowed. And so we just talked about the umbrella piece of that we're not giving access to other agencies that don't have an agreement with us out at the range. Any questions on the access control? Before I move next one. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. And as it said, that's Q1 of 2025. That should, as I mentioned, February 24th is when that's going to switch over. The sheriff's office has already got us our list back, and we will make those changes in the system here shortly. So that will change on that date, just so that if I didn't mention that yet.
What was the date again?
February 24th.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Couple of the other areas that I want to call out on this. So of course, we're in our periodic review presentation. Periodic review, the fence repair and upgrade project near the Livingston. Do you want to cover that? Any piece on that, Kevin?
Yeah, so we know we've had some issues up near Livingston Mountain with people gaining access to the property with UTVs. We've repaired the fence several times. It has been an ongoing issue. So Public Works came up with an alternative approach to that fence location where we're going to put in essentially it's a more impenetrable fence, thicker gauge, and it's more of a mesh rather than like a chain link or a barbed wire. So we're hoping that that's going to deter ATV entrance into the site from that particular location. So one project that's coming up very soon, we have a contract in place for that.
Right.
Is there the potential at all? I know that internet there is a problem, but is there a way that we can have monitoring devices there to pick up activity when it shouldn't be there?
So we recently established Starlink at the property, and so the internet connection is considerably better. And so I think that that's something that we can look into.
I think that would be beneficial. And I know there's elk and stuff, so it's going to be kind of hard to look at, but at least maybe we'll have video footage of people that are violating it.
Yeah.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. I agree that I'd like to have a conversation. I don't know if because it's sensitive, on whether it would be in executive committee, but just want to have a conversation about the existing security and what we could do to boost it. And I have some ideas, I'm sure you do, and I'd just love to have that discussion at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin, do you want to talk about the last three pieces? Because that's pieces that we're working on this year.
Yeah. So Public Works staff are preparing for a pilot project to do some road maintenance on the property. So this would be essentially construction services to perform maintenance on several miles of general access roads at Camp Bonneville. It's something that we need to work with Department of Ecology so that we know the level of UXO support that we need when we do that work. Sorry, unexploded ordnance support, to make sure that the work that we do is safe and that we're not encountering things that we shouldn't encounter, things of that nature. So, and we want to try to build that contracting, and that's why it's established as a pilot project. So we learn from that approach to do road maintenance, and then we build on that moving forward so that we can make sure that we maintain the roads and keep access to the locations that we need access to. The county forester and I are also starting to look at what we call shaded fuel breaks. It's a method of fire break that we think will be more consistent with the forest stewardship that we are doing at the property. So as you may know, or you may have, maybe haven't heard yet, we have the property enrolled in two forest stewardship certifications. One's the Forest Stewardship Council, and one is the American Tree Farmer Sustainable Forestry Initiative. So the forest management we do on the property is consistent with those certifications, and we think that a shaded fuel break would be an appropriate way to help establish those boundaries around the property that help with wildfire prevention. So a shaded fuel break is a distance of 100 to 200 feet from the perimeter of the property, that where you reduce the fuels, you reduce the canopy, but you don't remove the forest entirely. So it's not like a bare ground situation, which would be hard to maintain. And so that's the idea. We're starting that planning in quarters 2 and 3 of this year, with trying to get something implemented as soon as we can. Again, that's a challenge based on contracting that we're going to need to do to put it out. We have to auction the timber that would be removed when we do the process. How much of it can we do at one time? And then the other thing to consider is, again, the unexploded ordnance support needed during those contracting and timber harvest activities. All of that needs to be figured out before we can put it out to bid.
Related to that shaded fire break, is there any studies or data related to the comparison of that approach to like a traditional fire break?
There is information about shaded fuel breaks. I don't have it at my fingertips, and I didn't review it before preparing for this meeting. So I would have to provide that to you, but that's something that we can do.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just a quick question on that. I'm kind of curious about this. Obviously we're a government entity, and we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, in my opinion, than a typical private owner would be. But I am curious, if Camp Bonneville, the entire property, were owned privately, what would be done in terms of fire breaks? Is there any legal responsibility to do so? And would neighbors contribute to working together to try to do something? I don't know what would happen in private practice.
I'm not familiar with,
or would it be just do they not? Does it just
there are requirements in state law to reduce fuels in your property, like following forest management activities and things like that, to reduce the likelihood of wildfire. But in our research about this in the past, and speaking with Department of Natural Resources, landowners pay into a wildfire assessment tax, essentially, and the county, as a landowner, pays, we have to pay those for some of our legacy lands and some of our larger properties. And so the wildfire assessment taxes are then used by the state to fight wildfire. So I'm not aware of any large tree farms in our area that do major fire breaks around the perimeter, but I also haven't done a lot of the research to see if that's something that is a common practice for tree farms in our region. But I think I can look into that and see what we can find and get back to you.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because, I don't think anything like this would be done on a privately owned parcel. But then again, like I said, we are a government entity and we should hold ourselves to a higher standard. So I definitely support working on that. I am curious. I would be interested in learning a little bit more about the process that we're choosing and maybe why we're going that route? Not necessarily now, but
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Counselor Little.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to just learn about how the process is on that. I know the aim is to have a defensible barrier or boundary where you can get equipment in quickly and form a defense against. But the proposal is that it would be along the periphery of it. So there already is an existing roads on parts of it that would be already a barrier.
So there already are trails, roads and trails around a majority of the perimeter of the property because there's a fence line around a majority of the perimeter of
Yeah.
the property. But the condition of those roads and trails in portions of the east and north are in pretty bad condition,
Right.
and we need to do work to get them up to standard.
It seems like it would have a second benefit of security if you do it one tree height length on either side of the fence, because otherwise you're going to have tree falls.
Exactly.
Okay.
Kevin, I clicked off that. I apologize. Let me go back. The last one.
So I think the last one there, and this goes in line with supporting Department of Ecology in the periodic review. So the county and Department of Ecology are working on the periodic review and the remedial investigation feasibility study for what we call Remedial Action Unit 2C, which is that landfill for contamination and its connection to site-wide groundwater. So, and the current status of both of those is the periodic review report that the county was required to prepare has been submitted to Department of Ecology on the deadline that they requested. They are reviewing that. We will get comments back. There is still contract capacity with PBS to make revisions to the report. When that's done and Ecology is ready to present that to the community, they will take the lead on preparing that for distribution to the community, having an open public comment period. We've discussed a 60-day comment period as being an appropriate amount of time, but ultimately Department of Ecology makes that decision. And then there will also be a public meeting, an open public meeting led by Department of Ecology. County staff will be involved in that. A similar process will follow with the Remedial Action Unit 2C and that draft report. We've submitted the third revision to that draft report to Department of Ecology, and we're awaiting comments back from Department of Ecology. We will then take that report, and our consultant PBS will work towards finalizing the draft report for Ecology to then do the similar process of public comment and public meeting before it then gets finalized. And then we'll go into the cleanup action plan for remedial investigation or remedial action at that location. And the timeline for those things are, as best we can tell, Q3, Q4 of this year. It could take longer.
Any other questions?
Any other questions on our priorities for 2025? And then I'm going to transition to the FAQs where you asked your 3 questions last week, Counselor Little. So give me just 1 second. Michelle, I hope I don't mess this up when I stop sharing here for a second.
The one question that I have and that I posed last week when this came up is whether or not we could, for all of those entities that use Camp Bonneville now, if we could just pause their activity until we get all of these potential agreements worked out so that it would come back to the council to look at all of the conditions and agree or not. But I think there's just been uncertainty. Something might blow up. This is happening. They hear things in the neighborhood. If there's a way to just temporarily pause things till we get those agreements in place, if that's the desire of the council.
And I think I said last week that we paused the one and that there's issues if we pause the sheriff's office, and there is capacity issues at our range at English Pit. So I don't know if we want to, I know the sheriff's here in the room and what that impact would be to his office. And as I said last week, we're really close, and I mean, that's up to, of course, to you all, but that was the direction that we got in March 6th of last year to move forward with these negotiations. So Sheriff, if you want to, I don't know if you want to come up to.
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead. And I do think it would be good for the public to hear what those impacts
Yeah.
might be to the sheriff's office. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Councilor Belcott.
Well, as being in the military, I know with qualifying with your weapons, there are rules and regulations in order for you to carry whatever weapon that is, and having to qualify so many times or whatever. And I think, Amber, you mentioned before that there are qualifications in shooting during a nighttime. And then also my other concern would be being in compliance with the contracts and terminating them, and maybe what the ramifications would be in terminating a contract. So maybe
Yep.
the sheriff could, and you could answer all those
Sure.
questions.
And the other, come on up, Sheriff, you can join Kevin.
Thank you,
other-
Councilor Belcott.
The other piece I will add to that is, English Pit, when we, and we've talked about this when we did the 5-year agreement for that particular institution for that side, for the private side, there's housing coming up close to that every little day. And we only did 5 years because we know eventually that's going to go goodbye, right? We know that that's going to be an incompatible use. The other thing is we don't have a range yet for CJTC in any way other than what they're using on our English Pit area to use. So if we're shoving everybody into 190 into the English Pit, CJTC, all of our new recruits, the jail, the sheriff's office, even those 3 entities, that starts to be very problematic. And if we went out to a private entity and started to pay, let's say, Safe Fire, and went in and there's limitations, and Sheriff, you can talk about what the limitations are with that. And the cost that would be to the general fund for us to qualify there would be another piece of that as well.
Right, thank you. But I
Welcome.
do think it's good for the public to understand what constraints are existing. So Sheriff, welcome.
All right. Good afternoon. I know it's been a long day. Good afternoon, Councilor Belcott. I don't know if Councilor Fuentes is on or not, but I heard some things in here. It's good conversation, and I was going to add a few, and then if you take some questions. First of all, we have worked well with the deputy manager and the county manager trying to figure out Bonneville. I know it's been a talk for the last couple of years. It is a good range. First of all, I'm not a range expert. I don't build ranges, but I'm not a novice when it comes to shooting and when it comes to qualifications and whatnot. So Bonneville is a good site for us, and the access has been over the years gotten better and better and whatnot. And I'm thank you for putting in Starlink for us, because we do need that out there for a variety of reasons. But seriously, we do. So I do think Bonneville should remain an option, and going through these, whether you call them temporary or when they're finally signed with everybody, I think the council should really consider. I know that there have been some concerns or complaints from some people, but to give it critical thought of looking at ranges are very expensive. They're not easy to put up. It's not like the 40s and 50s. You went out, put up a dirt berm, put up a target and said, shoot. We do a lot of things out there, classroom. It's not just the physical skills, but the mental skills of when to shoot, when not to shoot, because everybody knows the highest liability law enforcement is use of force, and officer-involved shootings with firearms sometimes, unfortunately, ends that way. So it's very critical that we have a good place to do that. It's a safe place to do that, and Bonneville does have that. So I know there's a work session, so I want to bring something up. I saw the email that Amber and I were talking about last week on some of the, I kind of looked at them as a temporary. You said, should we do a temporary shutdown until we get them? I looked at those as kind of temporary between the sheriff's office. I think you included the FBI, maybe some others of, hey, right now, access is going to be this. This is what we've agreed upon. I looked that as if we were to shut it down, even for a week or two, we already probably have training set up there. We have to move all of those. If you said for a day or two, we could probably shuffle that around, but anything more than that would be could move a whole group of training and whatnot. And the other point is I want to bring up the nighttime shooting. I know Councilor Belcott, I know it says on here 6 o'clock, but we should probably talk about that because we do have to do night shoots because probably 70% of our shootings are usually in nighttime hours. And so right now, I'm not sure what the current agreement is on when we shoot, but 6 o'clock, we should just discuss this. 6 o'clock would be pushing it. In the wintertime, we probably need to move that out to 7 or 8 or for a few months. And summertime, it's light till 9:30. We don't stay out there. But 6 o'clock would be pushing up against the how many we get qualified in there. We just hadn't had this full discussion. So I don't want people to think 6 o'clock today is being decided upon, but that should just be a discussion. Probably at least 7 or maybe 8. And the usage of it is, you brought up a point of when is the last shoot? Let's say in wintertime it's 7 p.m. There still could be cleanup. The range instructors are out there. So using it should be a different consideration of when is the last shooting hours, and then when do people need to be off the property. It's kind of two different things because I don't think any noise should be made if people are cleaning up or whatnot, because it takes a while to shut down the range as well, depending on how many people are out there. So I kind of went kind of quick there. Do you have any questions of me?
Not so much questions. Thank you for that. You know, sitting up here, it's always easy to see things one way until you hear different aspect of things. But I agree. Like my thought would be, I would love to just close it and sort everything out, but I get it, and it would likely add tremendous level expense trying to ship things at the last minute if you can even find a place. We don't have anybody here from the FBI, unfortunately, to tell us what the ramifications, but I would imagine it would be fairly similar. Thank you for bringing that issue up about 6 o'clock. I think there should be some flexibility in there. I don't know about the shooting part. I'm going to have to kind of digest some more in terms of after 6 p.m., but that kind of adds to the value of looking at surveillance, remote surveillance ability out there so that we can see what people are doing.
Mhm.
Are they still performing their activities? Are they cleaning up? If they're cleaning up, I have no problem.
One of the considerations, and I even mentioned to Amber Emery last week, was I don't have a problem if there was video out there, but then I forgot I've been out there. There are undercover agents that go out there. So we have to keep that in consideration of what type of video would you do, because if it becomes a public disclosure, just so some of those considerations have to all be talked through.
Yeah.
And in Bonneville, I will say, again, we can shoot up to almost, I think, 100 yards, which we need to for rifles. Other shooting ranges are 25 yards, maybe 50. So it gives us the length there as well. That's why it's such a good location right now. And it is isolated. We don't, shooting indoors, they have indoor ranges. I'm sure maybe some of you have been to them. You can do a limited amount of shooting there, but you have more lead problems, you have distance problems, and what type of caliber you can shoot there. So that's why an outdoor range like Bonneville, where it's situated, it is pretty isolated from the public. I know the noise can be heard. The explosives, I used to be on the bomb squad itself. If that has been stopped or limited, that is really a sound too that can carry quite a ways, especially if the cloud cover's lower. So just considerations that a gunshot versus a high explosive going off are two different sounds. So they'll probably hear a difference, or probably maybe not even feel a difference because you can get that vibration. So that's something that if that is not going to continue out there, that should help it quite a bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My family does use the pit for range, becoming, being good, safe hunters, and we can go out to 100 yards there, and it's a good facility. And we also understand that there's very few places that we can go outdoors and do that. I got a chance to tour the shooting range, and it looked like it was set up pretty safely where the lead would be contained. Not many people have been there, so I was just wondering, and I thought it was just 50 yards, but I was just wondering if you could kind of describe the activities while you're up here that for the public of what kind of things you do there, so they can more visualize what it is and what the range looks like.
Okay.
How it's kind of laid out. It's got a good forested backdrop that seems very safe.
Yeah.
So I just want to.
And I'm not texting anyone. I am reading my notes here. So I wrote some down earlier. I was kind of pulled in from the bullpen earlier today for this. So typically we run we open the sheriff's office because we're probably the main user in addition with the FBI. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we have 2 open range days a day. That's by contract with the Deputy Sheriff's Guild. And I would probably provide it anyways, but so we can go out there for those hours and people can shoot, and then we have instructors out there. So to hone your skills and whatnot. Then we have qualifications throughout the year. So we go out there and we do timed and we put pressure on mandatory reloads. So we shoot very close sometimes. I'm trying to remember the qualifications. I just did it a few weeks ago from 3 yards, 6 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, 25 yards behind barricades. Again, mandatory reloads, night shoots with your flashlight, without your flashlight. So as many scenarios as we can. And then during training days, I'll say offhand, at least 2 to 3 training days we'll go out there and they'll use less lethal munitions, which don't make nearly as much sound, but the decision making and having shoot, don't shoot scenarios of, hey, you have to transition from a pepper ball gun or your taser to a handgun. The range is the place that we can do all that. We have a shoot house, or I wouldn't call it a shoot house. It's what's the name I'm looking for?
You're talking about the simulation building?
Simulation house, where we can go out there with simulation guns. If you saw it, then you saw those walls there. It helps us, to do searches and whatnot. So it's not just your flat out shooting range. It's a wide variety. 100 yards, I'm going to back that up. I believe the SWAT team goes back to where the storage sheds are, and they can get up to close to 100 yards. Normally 50 yards with our rifle, I think, is the furthest that we shoot for patrol. SWAT team needs to qualify at a longer distance. So,
And you're only using live ammunition on the range, right? That simulation house is all blanks.
that is correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And it has a great classroom and heat and, restroom. So you can have an all-day training out there.
Correct.
Counselor Young?
Oh.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's all good to understand. And I think, and maybe we're getting to this, but, as I think in the public's view, and because it's in our parks plan, Camp Bonneville is understood to be a park, and whether or not this is a function in the longer term that, and there's decisions and public process that will be underway moving towards that. But, as things have gotten more residential around the English Pit and Camp Bonneville, those conflicts are just going to continue to increase. So I think the public would like to understand how long a term, and maybe we don't know the answer to that right now, but how long a term would this activity occur at Camp Bonneville?
I would say from the jail, CJTC, and CCSO, just our local jurisdictions, not including FBI, until we have a range, whether we build a range indoor, the CJTC, I don't know if that's 10 years out, Sheriff, as far as the funding for the permanent facility for the Southwest Regional Training Center. Typically, they build those indoors for those links that Sheriff has mentioned. We have talked about potentially if there's space allowed at the jail work center because we have the property we put that on our capital list last year to explore an indoor ability, and that would be for all of our county departments that need to shoot. And then we could also have other agencies come in and use it if we, like VPD or one of the other agencies, if we so choose to do that. But as Sheriff said, those are expensive and those take long-term planning. And if we take that out on our own, the expense is high. If we wait for CJTC and the Southwest Regional Training Facility to get all the way up to speed, that's an option. That's an option that's in many counties that they have a regional ability, like Clackamas or Washington County. They have training centers that are indoors that we have, but we have that on the horizon. That's a thought. And we're thinking of those things as we're planning, and really why we're going to yearly agreements so that we can keep that flexibility in place that, say by magic, Sheriff goes up and gets the legislative funding for the building down the road, or, something happens with the regional training facility, or we're able to afford a capital project at the work center for an indoor range, then we can lessen these out, right? So there's a way for us to do that, but that's in our planning as we're going forward. And that's been in our planning all along when we've looked at not doing long-term leases past, agreements past 5 years. The English Pit's an example that I just used. We chose 5 years for a reason. We didn't know if that's going to be viable by the time that the housing comes up next to that.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a contract, and I don't know if it's a sore subject, but wasn't there some timber sales that that there was a contract that could be used to help pay for either the ongoing costs? Am I right about that? It was quite a bit of money, I thought, or possibly, I'm not sure. I don't build ranges for the baffling of some of the sound, but I thought that there was something written in there about the sale of some of the timber.
Yeah, so we manage the timber at the property for sustainable yield and have been harvesting out there, thinning, mostly thinning from below. And the revenue generated from those timber sales goes into a fund that's managed for maintenance of the property. So there is a fund available for, and it has to be. It's in some of the language of the agreements with the Army and the deed that money is used at the property.
I will say, Sheriff, on your point, what we're trying to get away from and what you won't see in the FBI agreement when it comes forward is that site improvements in lieu of payment. So we want to get away from that conversation of relying on another agency or an outside federal agency to do an improvement to the range instead of payment. Our initial focus and what Kevin's worked really hard at with this negotiation with the FBI is talking about payment, and then when they leave, remediation. That's our focus on that particular agreement with the FBI. So it's not in lieu of, or if you put baffling up, we'll forego this payment for the year or whatever that may have been in the decades past that we've had agreements that have been written. So it's clear. So when that funding comes in, if we want to use that, if council decides, that payment that we want to use it for baffling, then that's up to council. And on our capital list, we'll submit that as an ask. But we want to keep things flowing and make sure that they're transparent with money going in and to the right funds. The timber fund and the Camp Bonneville is much for the site improvements. And that's, in my opinion, buildings, roads, things that are in the actual site, not the shooting range. So
I just like to toss in Larch Mountain as a potential, and we've talked about that. But it's a longer term solution out there, but it's further out there. And if we could get Starlink out there, that could help.
and a snowcat.
Yeah, there's a few months that you'd need a snowcat.
But I think we have some. We've worked quite a few years on this. I think we have some good agreements coming in place that will protect the usage of the property as well as our interests and then what that site's used for down long term. Yes. Any other questions from the sheriff? Otherwise, I'm going to transition quickly to our FAQ site, that the questions that Councilor Little had on. And I want to show kind of where we're at in the public, if that's good with council. Okay.
That sounds good.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Sheriff.
Appreciate that. Okay, so you had asked Councilor Little, and I want to call this out for the public because you made a good comment last week of saying the public needs to know where to go to get the information. So our priorities are listed on our Camp Bonneville website of what we're working on every year. Our agreements are listed there. Our reuse plans listed there. Everything's a link, and people can go and look at any of the documentation. When we get FAQs, or when we get a list of questions like we did from the Friends of Clark County this week, we will look at those, we'll address them, and then we'll add those to our FAQ list. So this is an ongoing list that gets updated, and Kevin and his team manage that. So Councilor Little, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice too. I apologize. So one of the questions you had last week was, is it a compatible use with the property, the conservation conveyance? And Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about that section of kind of what our links are and kind of what that looks like as far as the reuse plan?
Yeah. So this question here, it's one that we've heard before. And what we point back to is the reuse plan that was initially drafted in the late 90s, revised in 2003, revised again in 2005. The revision in 2005 relates back to when the decision was made to convey the property as a conservation conveyance and to use it for natural resources purposes. The reuse plan in 2005 includes the use of approximately a third of the property as a regional park, and the regional park has various elements in it, including law enforcement training center and shooting ranges, both public and sheriff's office and FBI. Those are all included as elements of the reuse plan in 2005 when the property was decided to be conveyed as a conservation conveyance. So the ranges are listed in the reuse plan. The ranges are mentioned in the finding of suitability for early transfer, in the prospective purchaser consent decree that was issued by Ecology and then amended later. It was amended when the county took the property back from the third party that was managing cleanup for a little while. And I think so. I think what the answer is that uses like that were identified as being consistent with the use of the property for natural resources. We know that the use of the FBI range was occurring out there before the cleanup started, and it was excluded from the cleanup. And that's why the agreement with the FBI specifically mentions remediation, and there was a dollar amount of $400,000 included in that agreement with the FBI that was carried forward as agreements were updated over time. And so I think the point is that the FBI range would continue to be used by law enforcement agencies, and there's language in the reuse plan about needing to reevaluate its location and the amount of use that it receives when the property is used as a regional park, and it's not used as a regional park yet. But when that happens, that there are a lot of decisions that are going to need to be made in the future through those through those master planning processes that'll come.
So I want to call out just Councilor Little in this paragraph. The reuse plan is considered by the Army as the primary document that describes the intended reuse of the property. And so each of these areas is a link that folks in the community can go on and look at the document that governs those and the various things that we have looked at over the years. So that's all included in that particular paragraph. And as I mentioned before, every FAQ, everything that we update, we go in there and we review that as a team, and also through the county's departments to make sure that our information is accurate.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions. Councilor Little.
Yeah, it just still not clear to me. So in the reuse plan, it specifically says that the firing range is a compatible use with the conservation conveyance, or there's an exclusion that was
Click on
made
that.
for the FBI previous. I'm trying to figure out what the actual allowance is for that.
Yeah, so I was just reading the reuse plan before this meeting to refresh my memory on it. And so the reuse plan identifies a portion of the property that'll be a regional park in the future. And it includes certain elements that would be a part of the regional park. And some of those elements include things like a law enforcement training center and firing ranges, both public and private, or not private, I mean public and FBI sheriff's office shooting ranges. Other elements of the regional park would be things like campgrounds and yurts and RV camping, things like that. Rustic retreat center. All of those uses were identified as being consistent with the use of the property as natural resources, and it was transferred as a conservation conveyance. So those are all included in the reuse plan, which that conveyance was based on, and reaffirmed when it was conveyed as the reuse plan was updated in 2005.
Go ahead, Counselor.
Just a bit more clarification on that. We are digging into the weeds.
Yeah.
But
We are.
unfortunately, I think this is a an issue that weeds need to be dug into.
Mhm.
So the reuse plan, who was it drafted by?
So let me go to that because it's a link on that website that we have in that paragraph that shows the exhibits that are on that piece. So let me get to that. And if Kevin, if you want to start that while I'm pulling that up.
So the reuse plan was drafted by the county and consultants hired by the county and the what's called I think it's the LRA, the Land Use Review Authority, which that's the county was involved in all that process. It went through a lot of public participation and review by all the all those agencies involved in the process. So I wasn't here when that happened. All I have to go on is what I read in those documents.
Okay, and so the reuse plan was given to the Army, and they considered that when they granted the reconveyance or the.
Yeah, the reuse plan is what the consent decree, the consent decree uses it as the baseline for how the program of remediation that we were going to do on the property defines how all that remediation was going to occur. The remediation that is, when complete, along with long-term obligations, Department of Ecology can say that the site is protective of human health and the environment.
Okay, so if we went to the Army and dug into their files, that would be something that they would have on record as
Yes.
part of their decision.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And the language would say firing range.
So as I'm showing right,
Okay.
Right in
Yeah,
front
that's
of
what
you.
I want to see. Just want to see it.
right
Don't
here.
Click on links.
So 5.2, so there's, and if I can stop the commentary from the side, please, while I'm scrolling. Okay, get back down to that.
So that the red section that you just passed talks about the
Three.
the update that allow permits the conveyance or conservation of natural resources, and that the site is predominantly open space and wildlife, and it meets the intention of that legislation. And the remaining 1/3 regional park area is recreational and will also serve to preserve the natural resources of the area. So at that point, it didn't say, and we need to revisit all of the elements that were identified. It reaffirmed those elements that were identified as
Click.
being part of the reuse plan.
Okay, so I see now the part that says 1/3 will be recreational,
Yeah,
which sounds like a park, recreational.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where the firing range comes in.
It's right there. Chapter 5.
So it's under the definition of the 1/3 that's recreational
Yes.
is,
It's 5.2.3.
Yes.
okay.
Says Law Enforcement Training Center.
And if you look at the map of the reuse plan,
Let me scroll.
those firing ranges are shown on there. Yeah, keep scrolling down.
Okay, you tell me when to
It's
stop.
helpful. I appreciate it. And I think the public does too.
And so while we're scrolling,
Sorry.
how many acres of Camp Bonneville are in the parks plan? Is it the entire thing, or is it just that area, that 1/3 that
I
is?
think that's on our FAQ. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can-
Because the Parks and Open Space Plan has different components.
Okay, so it could be a park, it could be open space.
It could be open space, right?
So the whole thing-
Natural areas are part of the, part of the those different components.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And that is on our FAQ underneath the usage. Kevin, I hope I found this here. On just a second. Keep going. Fill space while I'm ask any other question while I'm trying to find this document.
And I
Space.
think, and also for the community, that there's a a chapter 6 in that reuse plan that talked about the different conveyance options, and then that the conservation conveyance is included there as one of the options. And then it was the selected option.
Other questions?
Okay, I think I got it up here. Sorry.
Just wanted to say really quick that I do appreciate this being set up because, it's difficult for you to find stuff, even more difficult for the public and for us to find that stuff. So we do appreciate this.
So we added all,
set up.
yeah, we added all to our FAQs so that we can extrapolate that information. Then we put the links there because it's so much info. And, I've been only in this for 2 years, and, every single day I learn something new. And I know that you guys also, it's a lot of information for all of us to learn. So,
And when you're in the documents, you can actually search names and stuff that
Yes.
helps, or words that helps you actually find it in the document.
so, Counselor Little, here's your section.
Okay, there's your section, Counselor Little.
Okay, this is very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
And you said we had 2 more of my questions that we're going over?
We did 2 more,
Okay,
just 2 more
thank
to
you.
go. Okay, so I will, the other one I had highlighted, so I'm going to stop sharing. And Michelle's never going to let me drive again, obviously, with my driving. Let's see. Okay, so your question was the FBI payment portion. And we touched on that a little bit in the prior use agreement with the site improvements in lieu of payment. And I want to be clear too, the prior agreements were really for with the sheriff's office, between the sheriff's office and FBI. So prior sheriffs, long before Sheriff Horch was in the seat, that was the agreements that were made. So if you look at our FAQ, and there's a section on the law enforcement on the very bottom of that, we have, hang on just a second. We have all that information listed. And so on the, and Kevin, if you want to add any of this to this, please do so. So let me scroll down.
I think it's right there.
Yep, perfect. So our prior agreement, and we just talked about this, is we had that in lieu of payment. We had a site improvement, and the receipts were kept at the sheriff's office. So that was where all the payments went to the sheriff's department, not to the county auditor's office. So from what we could tell, and I don't know if you want to add on this too, about the expenditures and pieces on that, Kevin.
I think from what we can tell is that there were expenditures documented through the sheriff's office of payments from the FBI for site improvements. I think the other thing that I can say is that Public Works doesn't maintain the range. Like, we don't spend money on painting the buildings or anything that needs to happen at the range. That's the responsibility of the sheriff and the FBI. And so before the sheriff was using it, the FBI, right? So I think that's another thing that's important
Exactly.
to remember.
So as we go forward in this new agreement, it's usage fee payment, and then that goes into our entire fund. And then we can, if we want to do capital improvements there, we can. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And that's a great plan. I just want to double check here. So the agreement on the contract was that in lieu of payment, they would do some improvements.
Yes.
Were those laid out in really specifics, and did they do any of them? Or
So
did they satisfy the contract as far as we understand?
I don't believe that they were laid out in any specifics. And what we have here are things that were identified, doing forensic accounting after the fact to show what expenses we could track against the property.
and the only thing we could see was the transactions that it's listed there. So you see that on the highlight that I've highlighted above, that we could see transactions of 114,000 over that time frame. And again, for that usage, as you know, Counselor Little, because you use a range, that's not a lot of money for usage for that time frame. So that's what will be addressed in the agreement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So
Does that cover all of
It-
Counselor Little's questions?
Yes, that's what I had, I believe. Yes.
Thank you for those questions.
Thank you, sir. So I just want, oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
I
I'm
was just going
sorry.
to ask if council wanted Amber just to hit the topics that are under the FAQs online, just to remind everybody what is out there and where to find
Happy
it.
to
Just
do
you don't
that.
have to hit every question, but
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
usage and the topics.
I
Because
think that would be good for the
Sure.
public. And when was this updated?
So the last update, and we have this at, when we update a piece, it's updated with the date, and then also on, excuse me, on the website itself, we will have, sorry. Truly, I can drive. So last update was February 5th. So you can see at the top of the header, we put when the last update, and if it's a specific question that we've answered multiple times, if we have any, is there anything different, we will put the date on it that any information changes.
Great.
And one thing I would like to call out too for the public is under the FAQ dropdowns, there is a character limit. So they're on these sections that drop down, there's a character limit. But as you can see, our document right here on the right-hand side where it says FAQ document, that's the entire document. And you can see the previous versions that are underneath there. So everything's kept there in order so that people can see that. And then the other things I would like to just share with council real quick is that we also have attached all the conversations we've had in the last 2 years with council. Kevin and his team have been going through and finding every work session or council time or anything where we've had a conversation about Camp Bonneville to link that to the website as well. So
I do just have a quick question.
Sure.
That 400,000 identified
For the
for
remediation?
remediation to the FBI,
Yeah.
that's still carrying forward.
Correct.
And that number goes back to, I'm just wondering with inflation, if it needs to be updated.
yes.
Yeah. So with the current agreement, what we're looking at doing is, because now the sheriff's office is using the range as well, that there's a split between FBI and sheriff. And then we took that $400,000, applied inflation, and then split it between the two. So
Exactly.
that there would be, because now that the county's using the site, that some of the remediation responsibility is the sheriff's office,
Yes.
which would be a county obligation, right?
Yes.
Here,
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
since we're all here, I do have another question. It's about public access and when, according to the deed, that could potentially happen in the future. And how the language is that, there will not be access to the property for members of the public until such time as all remedial action necessary to protect human health and the environment with respect to hazardous substances remaining on the property as of the date of this deed have been taken, and this restriction is modified or released. So what is that standard? And as I understand, there are munitions that are unable to be cleaned up because they are buried deep, covered with roots, and
Right.
and there's just a certain area that will never be cleaned up. So what is this
The
standard for?
The standard is the consent decree from Department of Ecology. So in that consent decree, it identifies a program of remediation. And the remediation is those different remedial action units where cleanup was supposed to be done and then completed. And of those, one is still active. That's landfill 4 or site-wide groundwater. When the consent decree requirements for remediation are completed and Department of Ecology signs off on those with no further action letters, like we've received some no further action letters, but we haven't received the last one for this other remedial action unit. When those are done and when we demonstrate to them that we meet all the long-term obligations. So there's a requirement for a long-term operations and maintenance plan. When all of those things are done, that program is intended to demonstrate that the site is protective of human health and the environment.
Okay.
And so ecology will make that determination
Okay.
at some point in the future when we're done with more of these requirements.
Okay. Thank you. And I did get to see site number 4 and all the testing
Mhm.
wells. What's left there? How long will it take? What do we know? How
Yeah.
many wells are still contaminated? What do we know right at this point?
So there's a lot to that question. It's very complicated, and but what we know is that the site was used for it was a landfill and a demolition area. So unexploded ordnances were buried there or exploded there. And then other things were buried there, like fireworks in the past. Contamination was in the ground and to a pretty deep depth where it encountered groundwater. And that depth, that landfill was excavated by the Army and its contractors before the county took ownership of the property down to a depth, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's more than 20 feet. That material was hauled off and disposed of at properly at an appropriate landfill, but not all of the contamination was removed. And so what was put in place was a draft remedial investigation and feasibility study and cleanup action plan that essentially called for groundwater monitoring until a point where we could revise that remedial investigation and feasibility study and cleanup action plan and take sort of the final cleanup efforts on that contamination. I would have to read the latest groundwater monitoring report to tell you how many of each well is showing, what contamination trends upwards or downwards, but there is still perchlorate, and the other contaminant is called RDX, and it's an explosives, and I don't remember what RDX stands for off the top of my head, but those two can, and I think there's one more that's also in that land in the ground there. And so the trends are different based on different groundwater monitoring wells. But I think the important thing that we need to understand is that the drinking water wells that are on the property don't show any signs of contamination. And the boundary wells where Lacamas Creek leaves the site don't show any signs of contamination. And it's been that way for a period of time.
Thank you. So you're saying that area, and I think you explained it out there, is a contained aquifer that
Correct.
is not connected to the
Right.
Lacamas
Right.
Creek.
It's a section of the Troutdale Aquifer that is separated from the main Troutdale Aquifer by bedrock, and so segmented off.
Okay, thank you.
I have just a little bit more about the contract. So, I'm not familiar with the entire history, but it's a new thing that CCSO is using it, and it has previously been only the FBI that had been using it.
I think the initial agreement was that the FBI would have the site. I mean, they had the shooting range before the Army turned the property over to the county.
Okay.
The sheriff became involved.
20 years ago?
Yeah,
2 years
yeah,
ago?
but
Decades.
the usage, I think, increased more recently because of decisions made about how the English Pit shooting range was being used.
Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I would say is that I would not really want to take 400,000 and adjust for inflation. I would really want to tie it to the entire remediation.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure that it's reflective not of current use today, but historical. So if CCO has been relatively light or not using for many years, but now they're at 30% usage, we don't stick CCSO with 30%, but yeah,
Yeah, we've been looking at those numbers.
Good.
So I just wanted to look at the headers real quick and then I'll close this up if that's good with council. So there's a section on cleanup. There's a section on public engagement, transfer, use and reuse, the wildfire prevention and risk management, and law enforcement use in the shooting range. And so those are the sections that we've kind of put the information in so that folks could go there. There's a drop down, and like I mentioned, up in the corner is the full document that is visible, and then the time and date that we update that when we get information. And like I said, the Friends of Clark County questions that came through this week, we'll look at those in the next couple weeks and add those to if we haven't answered those already. And then the priorities page, that's a newer one. So I just want to make sure that, I'll keep you updated this, of course, as things are going along. And of course, we can ask Kevin and Ken to come back and talk about this. But if we have any change, we'll update the dates or the quarter in this particular area and give council an update. So I will close with that.
I just had one last question. Well, maybe it's the last question, but is Lacamas Creek itself being monitored for those pollutants?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Very good questions. Thank you all for putting this information together. I think
Sure.
we're all better educated for it. So thank you.
Chair. Thank you, council.
So that concludes our work sessions.
Thank you.
And so we'll close the work sessions and reconvene in council time.
Yes.
And I'll wait until we're on council time.